Hi everyone, my name is Anisha Sarab and I'm the Education Officer at Victoria Law Foundation. We have some brilliant speakers today to talk about legal careers in the legal sector. But before we get started with the Q&A, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. Victoria Law Foundation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country wherever you may be joining us. The officers of the Victoria Law Foundation sit on the Wurundjeri land, and we pay respect to their elders and acknowledge all the generations of Wurundjeri and other First Nations people and acknowledge that the lands were never ceded. We recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice and marginalisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And we believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better, more equitable future. Victoria Law Foundation aims to break down the barriers to justice for all Victorians through our work in research, grants, and education. We are genuinely committed to making a contribution to a better justice system for all of us, especially those vulnerable and in most need. So a few housekeeping things that we need to go through. All cameras and mics will remain off for all attendees. This webinar is being recorded and the chat function is reserved for technical issues. And since this is a Q&A, we encourage you to use the Q&A function and you will receive the slides and recordings after the webinar.
Welcome to Law Week 2022, everyone. My name is Fabiola Sabrina and I am the Education Manager of the Victoria Law Foundation. Today's program is a Q&A session for university students who may be interested in a career in the law once they graduate. Each of our terrific speakers today will touch on their experiences in law school, their career pathways, and both the triumphs and challenges of working in the legal sector. Again, as Anisha said, since today's session is a Q&A, we will be monitoring the Q&A box closely and we'll ask all of you to please put any questions you have via the Q&A function. Now, our first speaker today, who I'm delighted to be able to introduce, is Shauna Stanley. Shauna is a lawyer at Maurice Blackburn. She's from Ireland, where she studied law at Trinity College in Dublin before migrating to Melbourne 5 years ago. Since arriving in Melbourne, Shauna has worked in the community legal sector, the union movement, and now works in Maurice Blackburn's class actions department. So I will hand over to Shauna now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hey everyone, my name's Shauna and I'm a class actions lawyer at Maurice Blackburn. Big thank you to the Victoria Law Foundation for asking me to speak to you today, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my deep respect to their elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So first of all, I will talk about my experiences in law school, and then I'll talk a bit about my career pathway to this point. So full disclosure, I did go to law school in Ireland, which means my experience would be a bit different to yours perhaps. However, I do think if you're like me and you're a law student who wanted to study law to help people and to advance social justice, then we will have a lot in common. So obviously the bulk of legal work out there relates to corporate and commercial law, yet when I started studying law, I was quite unaware of this. So when I first started studying at Trinity, I was shocked to see just how heavy the emphasis was on a very particular corporate career pathway. And then this idea that everyone should want to get an internship at one of those big commercial firms. It's something I found challenging considering I started studying law at the peak of the global financial crisis, which hit Ireland pretty badly. However, it did get better. Once I got into third year, I was able to choose all of my subjects. So naturally, I chose all of the public interest law related subjects and human rights law subjects. And I will say that my lecturers on these topics really inspired me and reminded me why I wanted to study law in the first place. And it was from my public interest law lecturer, Professor Jerry White. It was from him I actually learnt first about class actions as a concept and about the fact that they don't exist in Ireland at all, which I find kind of funny considering that I'm an Irish class actions lawyer. So I'd probably be out of a job if I went home. But I was inspired by the idea of class actions and how they're about joining thousands of people who suffered the same wrong together, collectivizing their struggle so that they don't have to fight on their own. And I do think that's quite a powerful idea. Another formative experience that I still draw upon today from my law school days is joining a committee of a student society called the Trinity Free Legal Advice Centre, of which I became the chairperson in my final year. So Trinity FLAC, it's a student activist society, and it runs free legal advice clinics, but also campaigns to advance social justice laws on issues ranging from the right to housing to enhancing gender recognition laws as well. So that would have been a key experience. And then I guess another key experience for me was doing a legal placement as part of my degree, which is something I really recommend you do if you have the opportunity. So my legal placement was at a community legal centre. And in particular, there I learned about the power of community legal education in empowering people to know their rights, which is really important. So in terms of my career pathway, so straight out of law school, I got a job at Claims Funding Europe, which is a litigation funding company based in Dublin, and it provides access to justice by funding class action type litigation in other European jurisdictions, because as I said, class actions aren't available in Ireland. But the funny thing about it was, I guess, is that although class actions aren't available in Ireland, I still managed to get a job sort of related to class actions in Ireland. So CFE happened to be owned, well, part owned by Maurice Blackburn. And that was the first time I ever heard about Maurice Blackburn, both the great work that Maurice Blackburn as a firm do, but also Maurice Blackburn himself as a person. So I was really inspired by him being a trade unionist and socialist who fought all these amazing cases, including the 40-hour workweek case. So that was really inspiring to me. And so after my stint at CFE for 2 years after that, I decided to go traveling, which again is something I really recommend that everyone does if they can. So we went traveling and ended up in Melbourne, and I ended up doing a 6-month stint as my visa would allow at Maurice Blackburn. So there I gained some really invaluable experience in the superannuation team and also in the social justice practice. And then after that, I went up to Darwin to the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency, or NAJA. And there I assisted in delivering community legal education to remote Aboriginal communities on topics including how to deal with fines and also police powers. Again, this is a really formative experience and something I think all law students should do, considering all of the harm caused to First Nations peoples by settler laws in this country. So that was a great experience. And then after that, I came back to Melbourne and I decided to convert my legal qualifications, which was quite a process. It involved sitting 6 exams, but I took it slowly and worked during that time as well. So I worked at the county court, and then I got a job at Trades Hall, which is the peak body of the union movement in Victoria. And at Trades Hall, I worked for 2 years on election campaigns and also in their Young Workers Centre team. And at the Young Workers Centre, I did a lot of community legal education in schools, teaching young people about their workplace rights, and also campaigning alongside young workers on campaigns such as criminalising wage theft, which was a successful campaign. And it's something I really recommend, if you're studying law and you intend to get into social justice law, I highly recommend getting experience in both community legal education, but also in community campaigning, because campaigning is all about changing laws. So after that, I was extremely fortunate to get my first lawyer job the week I got admitted as a lawyer, actually. And this was at the Northern Community Legal Centre, which is based in Broadmeadows. And there I worked both as a community legal education worker, but also as a community lawyer for international students during the pandemic. So my practice ranged from everything from fines and debts to criminal law to family violence as well. And then after that, I guess I've come full circle and I'm back at Maurice Blackburn working in class actions. and I'm currently working on the settlement administration of the Queensland Floods class action. And so like the union movement, class actions is all about utilizing collective power to fight against a bigger opponent. And so it is incredibly rewarding to get to live those social justice values sort of in action every day in my work. So I guess if any of that resonates with you, my advice to you all is stick to your principles and they will shine through to any prospective employer. You will be able to carve out a career path in social justice if that is where your passion lies, once you demonstrate a commitment to it. And so by that, I mean, volunteer for your local community legal centre, get involved in student societies, get active in your union. There's so many different ways that you can progress your career in social justice. And I do think we need more lawyers working to advance that as well. So I encourage you all to consider it. So that's pretty much all from me. Thank you very much. And I think I'll pass back to Fabiola.
Thanks so much, Shauna. That was really inspiring and I think amazing. I was so impressed by all the travelling and also travelling and doing amazing work to advance social justice and help vulnerable people that you've done already at this stage in your career. And I'm sure you're going to go on and do many more amazing things. And it's truly, I think, an inspiring story for any law students listening and who will watch this recording in due course. Anisha?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks so much, Shauna, for sharing your story. I think it's so amazing how travel has incorporated into your legal practice and moving around Australia, especially up in Darwin. I'm actually from there as well. So it's great to hear about your experience with First Nations peoples and advocating for them as well. And yeah, I think also class actions is probably an area that I don't think a lot of, well, personally anyways, a lot of uni students kind of know about. And I think it's really great that you're able to talk about that and explore that further, because I think a lot of times when people think of community education or legal education or working in the community legal centre, they think of representing, practicing, being a lawyer, but they never think about, oh, hey, there's class actions where you can actually represent a whole group of people who have the same or similar issues and then come together and advocate for them as well. So I think it's really great that you're able to share that with us.
Thanks so much. And for people listening, please put any questions you might have for Shauna in the Q&A, because we'll have time at the end to answer them. Thanks. I'm going to hand back to you now, Anisha.
Perfect. So our second speaker is Kath. I actually volunteer with Kath at Fitzroy Legal as part of the generalist and criminal outreach team every Thursday. So it's great to have her on today. So Kath is a community lawyer who works at Fitzroy Legal, helping clients in criminal, tenancy and infringement matters, amongst others. Kath has worked in community legal centres since her admission in 2016, and she enjoys being able to help those in our community facing serious disadvantage and vulnerability.
Thanks, Anisha. So yes, I'm Kath and I'm a lawyer at Fitzroy Legal Service. So I went back to uni to study law after I had my second child. I had been working in the union movement, just like Shauna, and I thought it was time for a change, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next. I thought I'd apply for law pretty much because I thought it sounded good. I didn't really expect to get in, but it turns out you can pretty much get into anything as a mature age student. So I was very excited about being in law school. I felt like I'd finally found what I really wanted to do with my life, and I was very much the typical over-enthusiastic mature age student, always with my hand up in class. I still hadn't decided exactly what I wanted to do after I graduated, but I definitely knew I wanted to practice in law, and I knew I wanted to work in some kind of social justice capacity. I had the opportunity during uni to do an internship subject, which was 1 day a week, and I did mine at the Federation of Community Legal Centres, which is the peak organisation for community legal centres in Victoria. And I think getting that opportunity was really helpful in terms of seeing the type of work that CLCs do, and also meeting the people who work there. When I eventually graduated after 5 years of part-time uni, and after having my last baby, I applied for a heap of graduate positions and trainee lawyer jobs. I ended up getting a graduate position through the Federation of Community Legal Centres, where I'd done my internship. And that was a 12-month position where I was placed in a few different community legal centres, which was really good to get a taste of the work that the centres do. I think I didn't realise at the time how small the legal world is in Melbourne, but looking back, any of those connections you make through work experience type opportunities, I think is so important. I've also been really surprised at how often I've bumped into people that I studied with or did Leo Cousins with. I think it really pays to always just treat people well and be kind of friendly and helpful, because chances are those people will show up in a job that you go for, or you might run into them at court or just in some sort of professional capacity down the track. And it just makes life a lot easier if you have a good reputation as someone who's easy to work with and people want to be more helpful, and it's good in terms of looking for jobs and having those connections. So I've been practicing for about 6 years now, and that's all been in I'm on my third community legal centre. It's really important to me to be able to work in an area that I feel really addresses some of the inequalities in our society. The clients that we help in community legal centres and at Fitzroy now are mostly facing really significant disadvantage. That might be homelessness, mental illness, drug and alcohol addiction, disability, and a lot of them are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Another thing I like about working in CLCs is just that I get the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas of law. So I've worked in family violence and family law, fines, tenancy, and now I'm doing a lot more criminal law work. I also get opportunities to deliver community legal education for different community groups, and to get involved in law reform and to look at the bigger picture in terms of social justice for clients. So much like Shauna was saying, that's something that's important to me, and I can highly recommend it if that's something that's important to you. But for now, I will hand back and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thanks so much, Kath, for sharing your story. I think it's so amazing when you were talking about just being kind to everyone that you bump into in the legal sphere, because you never know when they're going to pop up again in a job interview, in court, or even people from uni as well. I think we touched in the last Q&A earlier today about like it sometimes being a little bit competitive in law school and then also in the legal sphere. But I think it's really great that you touched on just, you know, be kind to everyone, and you know, I think it's really nice. It's a nice sentiment to take away as well.
And I think there's certainly, you know, there are lots of challenges in dealing with, you know, culturally diverse clients and things, but it's also, I think, often the most satisfying work, because you're really helping the people who need it the most. And I think when you can help someone from that background resolve a legal issue when, you know, they really probably had no capacity to do it without your help, it is such satisfying work, I think. And I think, you know, my own long-standing relationship with CLCs, I think there is so much to be gained from working in the community legal sector. It's a really wonderful place. And I think it's really fantastic that you're able to pursue, you know, a law career and find your, you know, I suppose your true path, especially after having had a couple of kids. It's really, I think, a really interesting and inspiring story as well. So it was great to hear it. And again, hopefully we'll have some questions in the Q&A at the end of this session. So thanks so much, Kath. And I am going to introduce our final speaker now, Grace. So Grace Nag, here she is currently a youth crime lawyer with Victoria Legal Aid, a finalist in the Lawyers Weekly Women in Law Awards 2018 in the not-for-profit, in the not-for-profit Lawyer of the Year category. Grace specialises in areas of youth crime, refugee and humanitarian law, with professional experience ranging from the Australian Judiciary Government agencies, NGOs, the United Nations and private companies. She is skilled in criminal practice, client-focused interactions and community-based legal practice, as well as international policy, program development and critical analysis and research. So I'll now hand over to Grace to talk about her legal pathways today. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Fabiola, and hello to everyone. Good afternoon. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm presenting from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. My name is Grace, and as you've heard, I'm currently a youth crime lawyer with Victoria Legal Aid, and thank you to the Victoria Law Foundation for having me today. So I didn't start out wanting to be a lawyer. I started off as a journalist and sort of came to law later in life. Law wasn't really something I ever had an interest in. I always thought of myself as a bit of a creative. So the idea of writing contracts to make rich people richer had absolutely no interest to me. I wasn't really aware of the sort of diversity of jobs that you can do with a law degree. I'd always had an interest in social justice and engaged in a lot of volunteer work, homework clubs, food banks, etc. So always knew I was a bleeding heart lefty. And doing my undergrad in journalism, I knew I wanted to work in human rights, but in an active way. Following that, I ended up in Papua New Guinea. I applied for a role as a media communications officer with UN Women and UNAIDS. So I moved over to Port Moresby for a year. I was working on a program there called Safe Cities, which is a program which makes public spaces safer for women and girls. So whether that's marketplaces, buses, trains, anywhere in public. And we were focusing on markets for the year that I was there, and I was traveling to different cities in Papua New Guinea. I was in the Highlands at one point at a market, and during my time there, a woman was burnt at the stake. There were allegations of her being a sorcerer and things like that. And I'd started working with a group of people within the UN who are human rights lawyers to sort of advocate for greater changes within the Papua New Guinean laws surrounding the issues of sorceries. This really, for me, sparked a thirst for change. So I kind of had gone from someone who was writing about change to someone who really wanted to participate and be active in it. I was working with all these lawyers and they were like, oh, you should go and do a law degree. So that's sort of what I did. So I applied for ANU and I went and did a Juris Doctorate there. As I said before, I didn't really have any interest in corporate law. And a lot of law school is directed towards that sort of pathway. I also found when I went to law school that I wasn't from a long line of lawyers. There's a lot of people I met was. I didn't have anyone I knew who was a lawyer, let alone an uncle with a law firm. And I found that I was from a very different background to a lot of people at law school. So sort of felt out of place a little bit when I began. I almost quit in the first 6 months. I barely passed in that period. And I think a lot of it was switching the way of thinking from a sort of creative way into the way that I had to think as a lawyer. I think my best tips for law school would be share notes. We used to get access through friends and things like that to everybody's law notes. And if you split up the amount of work that you have to do, you can really cut down on all of the reading that's out there. Also to lean on each other. You never know who you might end up working with, or as one of the other speakers said, it's a very small community. You end up bumping into people all the time. Also to throw your hat into the ring for everything. So I ended up doing an Aurora internship at NAJA, the Northern Aboriginal Australian Justice Agency in Darwin, where I got to work in remote communities and travel to bush courts and get just like a lot of exposure to different people in different areas of law. I also did lots of volunteering in different community legal centres and tried to get as much experience as possible. I ended up doing a summer course in evidence where the lecturer there decided, he knew one of the associates at the Supreme Court and they were looking for an associate, and he put out to anyone in the course would like to apply. So I ended up becoming an associate of the Supreme Court in the ACT. And during that, I got to watch some of the most incredible advocacy, and that really lit my passion to want to be a court advocate. Following, or probably during that period, I was applying for a lot of things because I knew that I didn't want to do the clerkship route. So I was basically applying for jobs as a full-time job. And I applied for a DFAT internship with the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. So I was there for 3 months during one of the council sittings. During that time, I was exposed to a lot of information and survivors of the war in Syria, and I became very passionate about refugee legal rights. So once I finished that and came back to Australia, I decided that I wanted to move to Greece and be an advocate in that space, in working with refugees coming through. So I did a bit of research when I got home and founded an NGO called Advocates Abroad. I got in contact with them and did a round of interviews and ended up moving to Greece and working over there, training in Athens and then moving out to Chios, which is an island just near Turkey. And so during that work, working in camps, working with translators, meeting boats down on the shore and just working very long hours, but meeting some incredible people and learning so much about the conflict in that area of the world. If you find an area, if you decide to do law that you're super interested in, I would definitely recommend having a look out there and seeing anything that might be a little bit outside of the norm, but if you can go and give it a try. After that, I came home after a year and I found that I could not get a job. So I was volunteering at Refugee Legal and at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, working on their gender project. I was making coffee for a year and I honestly reached a point where I thought I would never find a job in law. It was at that point that I joined the Victorian Women's Lawyers Association, and they had a program looking for mentees and mentors, and I applied, which I found really, really helpful. Getting a mentor in this sort of field can, even if it's not in the area you want to work in, anyone who's a little bit more senior, has more experience, can really give you a bit more perspective and just points of view that you wouldn't think of, because I was getting a bit desperate at that point. So I had this mentor and she helped me a lot with working on my CV, prepping for interviews, etc. It was at that point that I interviewed for Legal Aid. And I remember the day after I interviewed at Legal Aid, the woman who interviewed me came into the cafe I was working at and ordered a coffee for me. And I was like, never getting this job. But I did get the job. And now I represent young people, so under 18s in criminal matters at children's courts across the state. So from your shop thefts to your aggravated carjackings, everything across the range. So I'm in court a lot on duty. So from the first time a matter is listed to bail applications, through to contests and pleas. All children are aidable, so I work across a large range of children. Due to overrepresentation of minorities in the system, however, I work with a lot of people from cold backgrounds, those that are socially or economically disadvantaged, and a lot of our Indigenous youth. We also advocate on a more broad level, so through community legal education, whether that's at schools or in communities, and work towards bigger legislative changes on a broader scale. So through submissions for Parliament to law reform, that sort of area. I find the job that I do at the moment, it's law in a way that I never have the same day. So I'm constantly meeting new people, learning new stories, and I find the young people really hilarious and insightful. So in all honesty, I learn a lot from them as well. It's not as glamorous as the movies would make you think. Yes, there is that sort of prosecution defense conflict, but my main job is communicating. So whether that's with the bench, the police, and the young people and their family. So I think probably final advice from me, if I had to break it down into points, would be to throw your hat in the game. So apply for everything, even if you don't tick all of the boxes. A lot of people will wait until, you'll look at an advertisement or a job that comes up and you're like, oh, I don't have that much experience. Just apply. You never know what's going to happen. Mistakes make us better. You don't really learn a lot from the things that you do well. It's where you're really challenged that you're going to find out. You're going to learn lessons that are going to make you a better person and a better lawyer. As I said before, get a mentor. Anyone in the industry that has more experience than you is going to be a fantastic resource and someone to vent to and who can reassure you in those times that you need. I guess we're all alike more than we are different, so you can find commonplace with anybody. I think finally that law is often a lot about having a professional facade. So we have a face that we present in court, but often I think that vulnerability is the space where you can, it's a real asset to be able to be vulnerable with each other and with your clients. And that's the ultimate sort of connector. So I think that's all from me today.
Sorry, still muted. Thanks so much, Grace. That was fantastic to hear your story, and such an amazing, diverse career path you've had as well so far. I think all three of you, can show law students that there's so many different pathways and so many different doorways and so many different experiences you can have in the law, both in private practice and outside of it, through the community legal sector, through legal aid, through volunteering, through all the many and amazing organisations that are out there, many of which help the most vulnerable people. Now, I think we'd love to have Kath and Shauna back on now too. Thank you all so much. We haven't got much time, but I think Anisha is going to ask you a couple of questions, and we're just happy for any and all of you to answer them. Thanks, Anisha.
Yeah. Just going on what Fab was saying before, thank you guys so much for participating. Everyone's stories have been amazing and very inspiring, and I'm sure everyone watching is going to take away something from this session. So just kicking off with a few questions. A common belief amongst students is that practicing law can be stressful and demanding. What are some strategies that you as lawyers use to combat stress, fatigue, and burnout?
Okay, hi. So do you know what I've just been noticing in the last couple of months, the massive difference that it's made to me coming back into an office after being in lockdown for so long and having your colleagues and having that little bit of fun at work, a little bit of giggle, but also having people that you can debrief with and vent to and just share that experience. And I think being without that for a long time has made me realise how valuable that is to me, having good relationships with colleagues. It doesn't necessarily avoid burnout as such, but I think in terms of, it probably does help a bit, but also just in terms of just relieving stress on an everyday level, and especially when you're working with pretty emotionally intense matters, which it sounds like all three of us are in different ways. I think those relationships are really key to me being able to kind of survive that.
I'm happy to go as well. I think I completely agree, Kath. The being able to debrief with colleagues is just such an essential part of the work that we do. I think also scheduling in regular breaks, making the effort. Sometimes it can feel that taking leave is too much work, but really making sure you're scheduling those breaks, communicating your boundaries when you have too much on. It's important to be able to say what you can and can't do, set those expectations, and also seeking professional help, whether it's counselling or anything like that. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. A lot of the work that you'll do if you do enter into social justice area can be quite mentally taxing, and I think even just to have a check-in sort of space is a really good way to address that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Grace and Kath have said, like 100% agree. Particularly with debriefing with colleagues is just so invaluable, as well as, yeah, seeking that external support. At Maurice Blackburn, we do a lot of training on vicarious trauma, because a lot of our clients can be experiencing trauma, and so vicarious trauma is where you sort of start to take on some of those emotions that they are going through, and it can creep up on you so easily. So we also have access to an EAP, which is like a external counseling service. And of course, you know, I always recommend everyone to access a mental health care plan if they have access to Medicare as well. But for me, both of those things have been very useful, as well as just getting outside, going out into nature, going for a hike, getting some air, that can always help as well. So those would be my tips as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think we might have one more question before we wind up for today, Anisha.
I think an important question, I think, for a lot of students who are watching would be about what is the major difference between law school and learning about the law and being a lawyer who actually practices the law? So I think maybe like the focus of the question is on what's the difference between kind of learning about theories of law and learning about it every day in uni, kind of going through the motions, versus actually being in a workplace that practices it.
I really liked what Grace said before about a lot of our everyday work as lawyers is communicating with people. Those communication skills that you don't necessarily learn. There are some subjects you might learn a bit about them in law school, but the ability to be able to talk to people and relate to people in terms of your clients, but also being able to negotiate with people if you're negotiating with police on criminal laws, or being able to tell a story of your client's situation to a magistrate or a judge. Those communication skills and the ability to engage with people from all different areas, I think is almost the most important skill that I use on a day-to-day basis.
I say I probably echoed that as well. I think sometimes I use the skills I learned in hospitality and bartending a lot more often than I do any of the things I learned in law school. I guess it's like anything, when you learn about doing something theoretically, often it's I'm trying to find a word that's not long-winded, but extensive. There you go. But in practice, especially in duty lawyering, it's quick and it's dirty, and you're in and you're out, and you're trying to get everything sort of done. A lot of it is volume, rather than, often we don't have, which we would love, that sort of time to be able to really finesse things. And I don't think the current legal system, especially in crime, is sort of geared towards that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Similarly to Grace, I think that I do use a lot of that customer service skill that I would have learned when I was working part-time during my degree in retail. You know, as a lawyer, you've got a duty to your clients, and as such, that relationship is so important. So being able to, communicate with your clients as well as all the other different operators, such as the court, the other lawyers on the other side. Law is really all about communication in practice, and as such, that's why I'm a huge advocate for community legal education, because that's a great way to sort of gain those skills as well in a like a legally relevant context. But yeah, I would say that's the main one. I think law as a theoretical concept at the same time is it's an interesting one, because I feel like if you decide to go down a legal academic path, it's quite different to the practice of being a lawyer. But at the same time, if you wanted to do a different job that is adjacent to law, such as being a policy officer or working in the Law Reform Commission, then law as an academic discipline is actually quite useful then in that regard. So yeah, it just really depends on what you want to do. Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody. I think this is really inspiring and insightful tales today, and some great information for law students looking towards their legal career. This session is going to be recorded, and the recording will be made available. Thank you again so much for your time and participation.